faculty of the day, C.R. Krishnan. My dear friend, fellow chartered accountants, today we are on the third day of the 4 days seminar series. We will discuss Prevention of Money Laundering Act today. Agenda of the meeting would be as follows. Meeting will start by ICA motto. Thereafter, welcome speech and faculty introduction by Chairman C.A. Rajneesh R. Murthy. Technical session will follow thereafter, and meeting will end by vote of thanks. Now, Midun, can you play the ICA motto? Let us rise for the ICA motto.
येष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति येष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति कामं 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 कामंशो पुरुषो निर्मिमाणः निर्मिमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तदेव शुक्रब्रह्मा तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शतः सर्वे तदूनात्यपि कश्चन एतद्द्वैता 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 एतद्द्वैता.
Now I invite Chairman C.A. Rajneesh R. Murthy for the welcome speech.
Good evening all. Respected Speaker of the day, C.R. Krishnan, Secretary C.A. Martin Joseph, other committee members and my dear members. Welcome to third seminar of this seminar series. Today's subject is Money Laundering Act, a glimpses on Money Laundering Act. Prevention of Money Laundering Act 2002 is an act of the Parliament of India enacted by the NDA government to prevent money laundering and to provide confiscation of property derived from money laundering. Shortly, PMLA and the rules notified thereunder came into force with effect from July 1st, 2005. The Act was formulated for the following objectives: prevent money laundering, combat or prevent channelizing of money into illegal activities and economic crimes, provide for the confiscation of property derived from or involved or used. Some of the types of money laundering are tax evasion, theft, fraud, bribery, terrorist financing. All the above are directly affecting the economy of the nation. Our speaker, C.R. Krishnan, will give an overview on this act. Now it's my pleasure to welcome our eminent speaker, C.R. Krishnan, to the virtual seminar. Once again, I welcome all the members.
Thank you. Good evening to all. Respected Chairman of the LFP branch of SARC, of ICA of SARC, distinguished managing committee members, fellow members in profession. Third of the webinar series is being conducted, is on today. I did mention on an earlier occasion that, this time deviating from the normal taxation topics, we have chosen somewhat non-tax subjects, I would say, but very relevant according to me, because the option of choosing the subject was given to me by the chairman, and the reason why I thought that we should have a overview or at least a idea of these subsidiary acts, if I may so call, or subsidiary draconian acts, is for the simple reason, as professionals, I think it's very important that we have an understanding of the various implications of these laws that are being enacted and being put to use at a very large extent these days. Well, I was mentioning this afternoon that it took a long time, so many years of practice, because you never had an opportunity to look at the Money Laundering Act closely. There was a misnomer about this act onto what it could apply to, until you had a real look or a deep look into the provisions of the PMLA. For example, for a very long period, I thought that something that has been legitimized, something that is legal, would be outside the purview of PMLA. Meaning, if I am able to establish my source with regard to a particular transaction, then I was under the impression that I would not fall under PMLA, but I may fall under some other economic law, etc. But going into the provisions of this act, you would understand that it is just not the source of income that is important, merely because, for example, somebody has credited in the books of accounts a particular income which he has been able to satisfactorily explain to the assessing officer, to the income tax authorities. Still, you could be in trouble if at one point of time the relevant or the appropriate authority or the agencies that are administering PMLA are able to successfully prove that the money is tainted or illegal and would fall within the clutches of PMLA. Merely because you have explained the source of that income would not be an escape route for you. There is a connection between the Black Money Act and the PMLA. There is a connection between the Income Tax Act and the Black Money Act. So all these necessitates us to have an understanding of these various laws that are associated with the Income Tax Act or the practice which we do. And the other thing is, today you find that PMLA is being invoked by the authorities in several cases. Now, as professionals, many of our clients or laymen have started asking, what is PMLA, or why the provisions of PMLA are attracted in a particular case. I think unless we have a overall picture of this act, we will not be able to explain or satisfactorily reply to the queries that are being put to us. Last but not the least, the dangers that the profession faces if you don't follow the provisions correctly and if you don't take adequate care, adequate precautions, is something which is very, very, very dangerous, I may say, because, you know, it could land us in trouble. And that's one reason precisely why these allied acts I thought I would share with you. We had a look at the Benami Act the other day. We also had a Black Money Act. We had to look at the Black Money Act, we had to look at the Benami Act. This is the third in row of an act which is not, I would say, which is not closely, it is not at all connected, very closely connected with the Income Tax Act, with which we are very familiar. But at the same time, one which we need to really go over. So with this initial background, I think Rajneesh has made my task quite easy, because he has given an overall picture of the reason for introducing such provisions. Of course, we'll be going into a little deeper, and let me see how much we can cover quickly. This is not a very, I mean, section wise, this is not very, there aren't too many sections like the Income Tax Act, but those provisions which are embedded in that, I think we need to understand a little closely so that we get a better grip with the provisions of PMLA. Now let's trace the origin of this. The term money laundering is said to originate from mafia owners, laundromats. They were called laundromats, and it originated in US. That's how the word money laundering was coined, as we could see when we trace the origin. And in US, gangsters were earning huge sums by way of extortion, prostitution, gambling, bootleg liquor, and these were all illicit sources that were coming in the hands of people, which would definitely land them behind bars and would definitely entail punishment. But somehow, all these illicit sources were sought to be made legitimate, and there were mechanisms by which these were being brought inside the regular system, and then the tainted money was given the color of white money. And this was being done extensively by bringing this money into legitimate businesses. And at one point of time, it would be very difficult for the people to have a trail of this money. And once there is the mixes to such an extent that, it will be difficult for the authorities to have a trail of where, the first source from which the illegal sources have actually emanated. There was a great difficulty in finding out the exact source of this. Now, laundromats were chosen by these gangsters because they were in businesses. And Al Capone, a well-known gangster, purchased most of these businesses. And he was, however, prosecuted and convicted in October 1993 for tax evasion. So this is the genesis, the origin of the word. So it all came from the word laundromats. That's how the whole money laundering came in. And in a normal dictionary meaning, if you say, at one point of time, when you look at laundering, it could be equated to squandering. And a layman, without going into the provisions of the PMLA, if you look at what is money laundering, if you look at the coins, words that are coined, you would think of a situation where money is being laundered like anything. And for all those cases, the provisions of PMLA would attract. At one point of time, I also entertained such a wrong belief. But it is not so. It is actually the conversion of illegal money into legal money that is actually meant to by the money laundering in this context. Again, illegal arms mail smuggling, gambling, betting, drug trafficking, etc. There are huge monies in cash were generated. And this was sought to be brought into the system by different ways and means. And there were no one law that could prevent people from doing this. So at one point of time, you started generating all sorts of black money and other income. At the same time, you end up legalizing the whole thing without leaving much trail. And it was difficult for the authorities to actually pin them on these illegal activities. Some of the other methods by which these ill-gotten gains got into the money laundering was embezzlement, inside trading, bribery, and a lot of computer frauds. That is one of the major frauds that you see. With the technology advancing to a very large extent, you see computer frauds taking place in a very large scale, which would again involve cheating, and such monies were actually sought to be legitimatized through money laundering activities. The money which are tainted money is also known as dirty money. And money laundering is again the process of converting such proceeds of dirty money into clean money or the legitimate money. So that's what we mean, as I have already told you. Now in India, you had a different meaning for money laundering right from the beginning. Money laundering was generally initially associated with Hawala transactions. You look at money laundering, immediately what one goes into one's mind is a Hawala transaction. And Hawala transactions are very simple. You know, as we understand Hawala transactions, compensatory payments are made. Somebody is to be made a payment in India by a person, let us say in UAE. And there are agents both in UAE and in India. And the Indian agent takes care of delivering this money to the local person here. And for a commission, of course, for a commission. And he is compensated by making a payment, the counterpart making, I mean, the person who wants to make the payment outside India to the counterpart outside India, there again for another commission, with the result that the money goes into the wrong hands in UAE and it goes into the hands of the legitimate user here. Now, in this example, what really happens is the illegitimate money that was in the hands of the Hawala trader here in India got into the banking system. And the money that was there abroad got into the hands of the Hawala. So in India, what has happened is through Hawala, something got into the financial, I mean, into the mainstream of what we call as the white economy. Probably a black money got converted into white if it is they are successfully able to put it into a bank or give it to a house. Let us assume that somebody wants to give 50,000 to an household for expenses. Somebody's black money is generated and given there, and that person puts it into bank in small lots with the result that it gets into the system without being questioned. Now in India, it gained popularity in the early 90s, and initially politicians were pinpointed, or they were the maximum people who were caught in their net by doing all these activities involving illegal transactions, Hawala transactions, because a lot of money was available in the hands of politicians doing clandestine transactions and also involving themselves in bribery and all sorts of transactions, including enormous land transactions. And that resulted in India being classified as a very high-risk zone in terms of money laundering. Because I did mention in one of my earlier presentations that India is basically a cash-driven economy. When cash is being transacted at such a large scale in the country, obviously it is not all accounted money. I'm not saying all cash are unaccounted money. From the system, we need to draw, for example, some contractor has to draw cash for paying the wages. It is legitimate money that is being drawn. So all cash transactions are not illegitimate. But by and large, you have a pointer when cash transactions are enormous in nature. There is a suspicion that arises in the minds of authorities that, you know, when cash is seen at such large instances, even for withdrawals from bank, it points to a fact that it is being used for illegal activities or not for using it in the proper way. And in India, as I said, cash transactions are quite high, with the result that India got itself classified as a very high risk zone in terms of money laundering. And India ranks 78 out of 140, almost 50% mark in the year 2018, as per the Basel Index. That was the position of India as far as money laundering is concerned. Successive governments in India tried introducing various laws. They were aware of the fact that a lot of money laundering was taking place in the country at nukes and corners of the country. And you know, there were attempts, even though as we trace the history of the act, you will find that it has taken a very long time for an act to be promulgated. But there was no political will for any party, because most of the politicians involved in every party, whichever party you take, there was resistance. So even a ruling party could not very successfully bring out these legislatures for the simple reason that there was stiff resistance from the party members, for the mere reason that their kith or kin or themselves, they could be caught within the net of the PMLA. So though the successive governments tried their best to be proactive. They were proactive, in fact, at some point of time, to bring in a legislation to counter, to counter the money laundering activity in the country. It became a Herculean task in view of the political compulsions that most of the parties face, be it you call it a vote bank or caste bank or whatever it is. The desire to be in power was something more, and at one point of time, today things are different because the government has been a little bit successful. I wouldn't say 100% successful, but to a very large extent successful in bringing people into the banking habits, into the online banking habits. But that was not the case in 2000, early 2000s, when cash activities were much more and people were reluctant to transact through banks for most of their dealings. There are several statutes that actually address these issues. The IPC 1973, the Coffee Posa Act 1974, Safe and FOPA Act 1976, NDPS Act 1985, Benami Transactions Prohibition Act. All these acts try to address the issue of money laundering. But then the problem faced by most of these acts, where it was confined to one particular area or it could not bring about a wholesome legislation of what the government was looking at to pin down these offenders. For example, Penal Code had got its own issues with regard to procedures, and not all matters came under the provisions of the Indian Penal Code. Though it was very comprehensive, 1973 IPC was very comprehensive. Similarly, Coffee Posa or the Safe and FOPA, all with regard to foreign exchange manipulations that were being more concentrated upon. So there was no single act that could actually pin down these offenders and then bring them to books. So that will, even though there were several statutes that did try to bring about a way to pin down these offenders, it was not actually achieving the desired results. Now that led to the launching of the PMLA, which was, I would urge you to look at the timelines. Even after bringing it into the parliament as early as 1998, the government could pass it only in 2003. Eventually, it was passed in the year 2003 only. So it took 5 long years because of the debate, all those issues, or the changes, or whatever little form that they wanted to bring in, or the resistance probably from the opposition or from the ruling party themselves. They could not smoothly translate this into an act until 2003. And imagine, you look at the time frame again, to bring this, to notify this in the official gazette, to formulate rules and everything, it took another 2 years. And finally, when the PMLA came into the statute, it was from 1st of July 2005. And as I told you, the objective was to prevent and control money laundering. In addition to that, to confiscate and seize the property obtained illegally from the laundered money. That was one of the two main objectives. And of course, to deal with any other issue connected with money laundering in India. So this was the main objective with which the PMLA was promulgated. It extends to all of India, including J&K, and it came into force on 1st July 2005, as I told you in the previous slide, with major amendments to the law that were made in 2009 and 2012. So these were the 2 years in which the PMLA has seen some amendments. And as I told you, PMLA has been used in the recent past. Enforcement Directorate is in full swing. A lot of cases being handled by ED. And for your information, it is ED that is handling PMLA Act as opposed to income tax people who are handling the Black Money Act. And the very reason why this particular act has been entrusted with the ED is that, unlike income tax, there is a there is a need to actually deal with so-called gundas, so-called tough guys, so-called guys who are into illegitimate trade for quite a long time. And income tax department was considered to be a soft department, even though when we go for cases, they show their faces to us and try to shout at us. When it comes to real thugs, real gundas, or real money launderers, I think the income tax department was left far behind in terms of combating these people, and it was left with the more tougher enforcement directorate to take up the challenge and bring these people to books, because it required a really tough way. Today, if you look at what the difference in handling an income tax case and a PMLA case, in an income tax case, the authorities would allow you to go for lunch, they will give you water, you want to go out, you want to relax, everything very, very, even while taking a statement, they don't apply that much of a pressure. Whereas in a PMLA Act, you will say that 11 hours of continuous questioning without even allowing any morsel of food. That is the manner in which they are a little tough. It is a mental torture that is happening as far as the investigation by ED is concerned. So that's a major difference why it is in a tougher, and that is required to bring out the truth. Of course, both the acts do not allow third-degree measures, though to a minor extent, possibly the ED may be using it. I'm not very sure about it. But today, things are different. Earlier on, probably it was possible. But today, using third-degree measures is something which even the officers are not very comfortable with, because it could land up in trouble with so many hidden cameras or somebody trying to take a video of what is happening inside. Now, that explains possibly why there is a tougher handling of these people by the ED. And in some cases, this is what is important. This is what exactly the fourth point. I think all of us have to be careful. Reason why I chose this as one of the subjects. In some cases, the same has been invoked against professionals closely associated with such offenders. And that professionals includes chartered accountants also. Now, some of the major acts covered: IPC, NDPC, so on and so forth. All these acts, several acts are covered. So any offense in this could be a triggering point for booking under the PMLA. That is quite possible. This list is only illustrative and not exhaustive. The money laundering activity is a single process. If you look at money laundering, the activity of money laundering is a single process. The objective is very simple. Illegal money is brought into, is given a taint of a legal money. It's a single process, but it can take different routes. And that's exactly termed as cycles. And the Act does not specifically bifurcate this, but the specialists have coined 3 stages: placement, layering, and integration as the 3 stages of the single process of money laundering. And as we go across, we'll look at what these 3 stages are. The placement is the first stage, where black money is injected into the formal financial system. Now, the question is illegal activity on one side, as I said, betting, or your bootlegging, or your illicit liquor, or your ganja, or whatever it is. That is the source of your earning, your black money. So once this black money is earned, the next objective is to inject it into a formal system. Because today, you cannot keep on using black money for all your objectives. More so in the modern world today, when you are questioned for everything. Even if you go for a small transaction, your PAN has to be given. The bank does not accept many of the deposits beyond a limit. So you need this money. At least a part of the money has to be injected into the formal financial system for it to be useful. For example, you look at buying a property with illegal money. unless it goes into a bank account, at least the white part of it has to go into the bank account for the transaction to take place. Because you cannot transact a property worth about 40-50 lakhs by paying cash. It has to either be a bank transfer or a DD or a account pay cross check. It has to be a banking transaction. So there's no point in my having enough black money in my hand unless I convert it into white money. So first stage in placement is injecting this money into the financial system. And the launderer introduces illegal profit into the financial system in various ways. By depositing cash in domestic banks or in other types of formal or informal FIs. Now, when you say depositing cash in domestic bank account, naturally you will ask me a question, sir. Suppose I earn 1 lakh, I can't today go and deposit into a bank account like that. Very true. Today the limits are there. You must be having a PAN account, or your question, if you are going to introduce large amounts of cash into your bank account, there is going to be a mapping of the PAN if you are going to do that on one hand by the income tax authority. There are so many various agencies that are going to catch you when you are going to deposit in cash. So when you are saying deposit in cash, how is it possible? I did mention in one of my earlier classes that there was a classic case of a mill owner in Salem opening 265 accounts in the name of his employees and then depositing small amounts of cash below 2,50,000, which was the demonetization limit that the government had prescribed at that point of time. Similar to that, several accounts in several banks in several places. It's not an easy job. I do admit that it is 20,000. Suppose you're going to be questioned on 50,000 plus the bank is going to question you, and you've decided that you will go with 30,000 rupees as cash deposits. Now, how many banks? In one bank, you can take 10 accounts and deposit 30,000. So 3 lakhs in one bank. You'll have to, in a town, you'll have to look at 5-10 banks. In 10 towns, you'll have to look at, if you're looking at something like 50 lakhs, 60 lakhs, or maybe close to 1 crore. This is the volume of things, and that was happening actually. And the other thing is, financial institutions were the best for. Today most of the shares are oversubscribed. So things are changing now. Until very recently, there was nothing like, even though in the Demat account for small holdings, nobody was questioning you. You don't have to give your KYC. All those things were not in force at that point of time. And it is precisely to plug all these loopholes that the system of KYC, that the identity of the person bringing in the money, all these things are brought into the system exactly to prevent things like money laundering. As an individual, I am paying. Sometimes I am paying. I have to invest 5,000 rupees in a share, and IPO I want to invest 5,000. The hassle that I have had to go through, even if it is my white money, the hassle that I have had to go through to invest this 5,000 is something phenomenal. I keep asking why the government is troubling small people like who's investing 5,000 rupees. But behind the screen, if this is allowed freely, what will happen is there will be 5,000 people who are investing 5,000 rupees each in different banks at different parts of the country. And all this will come into the FIs, and FIs could probably again very legitimately, having raised from the public, they could invest that in the proper channel in some other countries, in some other instruments that are in the proper banking channel or proper financial instruments. So this is how in small holdings through the banks, it tends to get into different bank accounts, and from there, once it into a bank account, what really happens is there are lots of cross transactions that take place. When I say cross transaction, I take 5,000 rupees and then I give it into 5 accounts. I transfer from A account to B account, B account to C account, to D account to E account. Let us assume A to E are different people. And then finally, when E comes for a confirmation, E gets a confirmation from D. And D has got Pakka sources. E gives a confirmation. Now, what has happened in this case is an illegitimate money that has come into the hands of the A. A went to B, B went to C, C went to a legitimate person who had source, who could explain properly to D, and from D it went to F, and F could explain D. From D it went to E, and E invested in in the FIs or whatever it is, the financial investment. So, and the problem that really happens in a case like this is that when you're investigating from the money laundering point of view, if F is caught for money laundering or somebody else is caught for money laundering, and then they take the trail to the shares invested, it would be difficult for them to trace back. They have to do from F to E, E to D. D as the person was confirmed. Again, go back. D will say that I have got it from C, C to then B, B to C. So it goes on and on. So classical money laundering would be not just from one. So they wait for some time. This black money is actually injected into the system, and then you do some sort of a juggling for some year. Many times this happens in income tax cases also. We also because we are not involved, we should not be involved in such money laundering activities. That's what we will be coming to that. But at times, I think we have also practiced this system of asking our clients, suppose you introduce the money in the bank, you hold on for 1 or 2 years. By the time 1 or 2 assessments are completed, and your balance sheet is already having that parked fixed deposit or something, which was originally introduced by way of a share capital, by way of agriculture income or something like that. I am talking of your own business, number 2 money, let us assume. We have credited as agriculture income. First year, no scrutiny, we escape. We say you hold on. If the magnitude is little high, we say hold on for 1 or 2 years. It is parked in an FD. And then you make an investment in a immovable property. So when you make an investment in an immovable property, the immediate source is out of withdrawals from FD. And when your question on the FD, sir, it has been in the balance sheet for the last 2 years. So the trail for the origin actually gets away from the whole transaction. So this is a classical example that you find in money laundering. So the trail becomes extremely difficult for the investigating authorities to actually go back and find out actually from where the original source is there. When you are breaking up these sums and then using multiple accounts, it becomes extremely difficult. Now we go to placement. Placement is actually siphoning off across borders for deposit in foreign FIs or used to buy high value goods such as artwork, aeroplanes, precious metals and stones that can be resold for payment by check or for bank transfer. So you place these, typically you place, for example, gold in India, gold is a classical example. Most of the black monies are actually invested in gold. And at one point of time, you go to a jeweler and the jeweler says that today, no, I can't, 269 ST is attracted. So I'll have to pay you by account pay cross check only. No problem, you can pay me by account pay cross check. And then, some 4 lakhs or 5 lakhs of gold is offloaded in a jewelry. He gives you a pakka check and it is accounted as purchases by him. So it's a sale of jewelry. And the client goes to a chartered accountant. Chartered accountant says that you are liable for capital gains. And then the indexation takes place, and then whatever is the capital gains, 20% tax is paid on that. Now, if you trace the origin of this gold, from where this gold has been acquired by you, it would be a case where, in terms of business, the example I am quoting, it would be business income because we are advising our business people. But in the case of money launderer, the laundered money is actually invested or placed in gold, and then it is brought back into the channel by sale of gold into the system, so that illegitimate money is earned. Similarly, high value art books are there. There are art pieces are priced at phenomenal prices. Certain art pieces. So though money is laundered, this is one medium through which money is laundered. Now the second stage in money laundering is layering. Again, it engages a series of conversations of movement of funds to distance from their source. This is what I was explaining. In fact, this particular terminology which I explained belongs to the layering category. And several accounts, it is channelized through several accounts, not only through accounts. In between, it goes to a trader and he uses for purchase of his goods, purchase and sale of goods. It is actually deployed in that. Again, in investments in bonds, stocks, etc., traveler checks, and one other reason is, one other main way of laundering the money is through traveler's checks. Traveler's checks, of course, today it is difficult. Earlier on, you go to a bank when you're making a foreign trip, you can buy traveler's checks in addition to the FTS or NTS. FTS is foreign travel scheme and NTS is where you get $250 and $500. In addition to that, you buy some traveler's check maybe from another bank. And these traveler's checks are normally, anybody can buy, you can probably park the money in your friend's account and then get some traveler's checks. And then you can take it abroad and spend it in your trip abroad. So that was again one of the channels through which these monies were actually being used. Now, high value goods and monetary instruments are the proceeds and invested in real estate and living. Again, another area where money is laundered is real estate. Now, real estate, very, very simple. Suppose I have laundered money with me and I'm utilizing it. Normally, it will be 50%, half the price. Suppose I'm buying a property for 2 crores. I will pay 1 crore as legitimate money. The balance 1 crore will be out of my illegitimate, ill-gotten money. And then 2 crores comes to me as property. Of course, 1 crore only is registered. And like in the case of the gold, I dispose of the real estate after some time by paying capital gains. And by paying 20% after indexation, I bring the ill-gotten money into the system. Shell companies, classic examples. That's why Modi government was very active. You found that so many shell companies were in existence. And all these were for the purpose of, all these paper companies or the shell companies were for the purpose of money laundering. And some of them have successfully evaded scrutiny or have surpassed scrutiny, having convinced the officers very legitimately. And these monies are sometimes it goes into offshore havens like Mauritius or other places where tax havens are there. And this also happens. Once it is in the tax haven, then you don't pay any tax there also. Subsequently, when your period is over, you can bring back as legitimate money also. Now, integration, that's the third and final stage of this money laundering process, all put together. It is done in such a way that original association with the crime is sought to be obliterated so that money can be made use by the offender or persons receiving it as clean money. So the entire process of this money laundering is such that, the ill-gotten money in different ways it enters the system as ill-gotten money, but ill-gotten money, ill-gotten money goes inside the system as a genuine money, and then it comes back as accounted money by paying trivial amount of tax by way of capital gains or whatever applicable tax. In the case of business, it will be as a business profit. For example, you take the case of a trader. Now, typical is that traders who are dealing in rice or in spices or purchase of agricultural produces for prices, spices, etc., condiments, etc., if you look at it, the money actually goes in the form of cash. And there's no trail for this money. And once you get a bought note or anything, under invoicing, over invoicing, whatever it is, the sale proceeds of most of these people actually comes into the system. Very systematically, it comes into the system, and there is no question thereafter. In the process, what has happened is the ill-gotten money has got into the system, and that got converted into new process. Exact typical cases of money laundering that is happening through various ways, and this is a process, the integration process, by which integration we mean that the ill-gotten money is integrated as clean money. So that process finally takes place, and by this stage it is exceedingly difficult to distinguish legal and illegal value. That is what I said, because once there is a mix-up, it becomes difficult, and even for the authorities who are actually investigating this, it becomes extremely difficult for them to have a trail of these this money, a trail of these transactions, and to actually get hold of get to the root of the actual transaction. Now, this is a small chart showing the money laundering cycle. Now, as I told you, these are the crimes that are normally taking place in a money laundering activity: corruption and bribery, fraud, organized crime, drug and human trafficking, environmental crime, then terrorism, other serious crimes. So once this is a major activity through which the money is generated, and then you go into the placement stage, where initial introduction of criminal proceeds into stream of commerce, that is, it comes into the main channel, and most vulnerable stage of money laundering process, because this is at this point of time, if it escapes this process, it is very difficult for any authority to have a trail of this. And once that happens, then it goes into the third stage of layering, where it involves distancing the money from the criminal source. I did explain that, at this point of time, you go back trails. For example, A to F, I did mention. Your F is now the older the money, to go back to A becomes extremely difficult. So that the layering stage is that, and movement of money will also happen. It's just not between accounts; it also moves between countries also, and that makes it increasingly difficult to detect. And from there, in the last stage, it gets into the integration stage. It's the last stage in the money laundering process. That occurs when the laundered proceeds are distributed back to the criminal, and it creates appearance of legitimate wealth. Now, the distribution process, as far as occurs when the laundered proceeds are distributed back to the criminal. Now, when the money laundered process is coming into the account, what really happens is the integration process. There is a compensatory payment that has to be paid. Now, suppose one is what you do on your own. The other is the illegitimate activity is done by X, Y, Z. For them, you will have to cash the resources, and these people who have done the predicated crime will have to be compensated, because they may be the actual perpetrators of crime. But here, once it comes to the placement, somebody may be. It's not always that the person who does the crime completely flows through the chart. Somebody does the crime, and somebody else is the beneficiary of those crimes. And in those cases, the money has to be given back to those criminals. So this is the pictorial depiction of what we have been discussing. Collection of dirty money, again, that will go by way of placement into the bank, and it is layering, transfer of bank from one account by wire transfer, offshore payment, loan to X company, and then payment of Y of false invoices, X company, so on and so forth. And then it goes into the integration process by which purchase of luxury assets, financial investments, commercial, industrial investment, etc. all takes place. Now, one thing, at this point of time, we will have a confusion. This is not necessary at this point of time. It need not be. This process can also happen in a case of a untainted money also. Non-tainted money also, this can happen. Suppose a legitimate money, somebody does a business and earns undisclosed income. It could still follow the same process. So anything that follows this process is not tainted money. But normally the tainted money is collected and routed through this process. That is what, this is how the money laundering activity actually takes place. It could also happen to untainted money also. Now, methods of money laundering, smurfing is possibly the most commonly money laundered method, by which, this is the method, as I told you, this is an example where the origin is from drug money, and because it is in dollar, let us assume that it is in US. US had a threshold limit of reporting requirement from the bank. If less than 6,000 rupees, the bank need not report. So in 6,000, in day 1, day 2, day 3, there's a daily limit. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. So $30,000 goes into the account where there is no reporting requirement as far as the FIs in US at that point of time was concerned. Again, it goes into the bank, each person goes, and then your account balance becomes 30,000. So what your drug money of 30,000 becomes your account balance of 30,000. Now let us assume, like in India, it's only 2% scrutiny, and this case does not come under scrutiny. this $30,000 cleanly passes away as your accounted money without really knowing the source of it. Of course, in US, the law is entirely different. Even cash deposits of this magnitude will have to be, I mean, the CPA will ask you questions, and then, he has to show the source. All those things are there. In India also, why in US, in India also that has to be there. But, we have different methods when small amounts are there. Capital building can also take place. For example, in India, up to 5 lakhs or even up to 8 lakhs or 10 lakhs, normally questions are not asked. Over a period of time, you use 3-4 assessees to build up this capital, and at one given point of time, maybe after 4 or 5 years, you will have a substantial amount, say 40 lakhs, 50 lakhs accounted. Shell companies I did discuss. Then third-party checks and bank drafts drawn on different institutions are utilized and cleared via third-party accounts. Now, this is again another routing method, and often these are purchased using proceeds of crime. Since these are negotiable in many countries, the nexus with the source of money is difficult to establish. Once the money leaves the country, then it becomes extremely difficult. For example, if you're successfully able to pass through the banking channel and then remit some money abroad, then to go and then investigate that and bring a trail of that becomes extremely difficult. Vice versa also, especially the other way around, it is difficult because the money goes outside India and then comes through proper banking channel. Even if it is ill-gotten money, the investigating agencies would find it extremely difficult to actually have a trail of this money. Now, bulk cash smuggling is yet another method of money laundering. Now, bank complicity, this is where the employees of the bank also collude in facilitating the money laundering activity, money laundering process as such. Now, very simple, KYC norms are required generally till very recently. Today, it is very strict. Even as auditors, we have been warned strictly that KYC is not taken lightly anymore. But in the early parts of our bank audit, we were not very much concerned with KYC norms. But today, it is not the case. Today, banks, if they don't take KYC or they take something instead of the correct KYC, then they could be in trouble. No, that is something which is very serious now. So, bank complicity is where employee. Now, how can an employee? You may be wondering how employee, other than helping in KYC. I'll give you a small example because it's nothing to do with money laundering. But I just wanted to tell you how a bank employee can help somebody, help a customer. In the example which I'm going to say, there was a search in one of my client's premises. Of course, he became my client after the search only. And the reason subsequent to the search on my inquiry with the officers, because of my closeness with the officers, the reason which I came to know from the officers were that there were 2 checks that were intercepted by the income tax department during a survey in one of the brokers' place. One of the brokers' place, they found 2 5 lakh checks issued in favor of my client. He was my potential client, now my client. That check was issued in favor of my client. 1 5 lakh went to my client's father, another 5 lakhs went to my client. Now these 2 5 lakhs were given when the person was questioned. He said, "Sir, these are monies given for the purpose of transferring an NRE account, transferring money to an NRE account in a bank, in a particular bank, in State Bank of Travancore then." Now what happened was, what this person was doing was that, I'll just I'll break for 1 second, just 1 second, I'll break. Doctor, I'm sorry, back again. Now, in this case, what had happened was 2 checks of 5 lakhs were issued to the NRI, to an NRI account holder in the bank. And when the department investigated the whole procedure, the case was like this: somebody remitted money from abroad to his family for their expenses. He works hard outside India. It's a salary income that is coming outside India. And then this money is actually remitted to his kith and kin for their expenses in India. Now, unfortunately, the bank accountant and the officer, I think the manager was not there, the officer and the bank accountant, they connived. And then this broker got hold of these people, and then he was getting monies when somebody transfers a money that is lying in their NRI account from the local check here, the person comes and to draw 50,000 rupees from that NRI account. The housewife who comes to the bank is given a royal reception, got inside the accountant's cabin, and then tea is given, token is obtained. She need not stand in the queue, no forms will check. She has not written in which account or nothing is written in the check. 50,000 rupees 50,000 only, words and figures are filled, a sign from this person is obtained. The payee's name, ഞാൻ അവിടെ എഴുതണ്ടെന്ന് ചോദിച്ചു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ ഞങ്ങൾ എഴുതിക്കോളാം മാഡം, കുഴപ്പമൊന്നുമില്ല, അത് അക്കൗണ്ട് നമ്പറൊക്കെ നോക്കി ഞങ്ങൾ എഴുതിക്കോളാം. She is given 50,000 rupees. And this 50,000 rupees is provided by the broker. It is not coming out of the banking system. So sometimes, it could go to 5 lakhs or something. So immediately, maybe at one stretch, this money has to go. Either a cashier must be involved, or 5 lakhs or 50,000 is given to this lady. She goes home with that 50,000. There is no loss for her because her husband sent her money 50,000 and her account is debited to the extent of 50,000. Now the accountant cleverly takes his check and writes, account pay cross check in favor of another NRI account. Another NRI account is 50,000 goes. Imagine some 10, 15, 20,000 rupees, 20,000 into 50, 20 people into 50,000, 10 lakhs goes to an NRI account. From there, gift is given. Of that, 5 lakhs were given to my assessees. And he got a confirmation saying that out of love and affection, not possible today, 56 is there under the provisions of the Act. And then when the income tax authorities traced the trail, they were shocked to see that such a thing was happening in the bank. Bank employees got a commission for that. So the person who got, of course, as far as my client is concerned, he pays 8% or 6%. The brokers, there's a racket involved. And they're all into these Hawala transactions. All these brokers and all these people. So this booty is shared, whatever is the commission that is shared between all these people. And so department is shocked because they never expected that such a thing would actually happen here. But it did happen. It really shocked me also because I was a little bit taken aback seeing that such things happen in a bank. So that is a money complicity. Then money services and currency exchanges that enables individuals to exchange foreign currency that can be transported out of the country. That happens many times when people go out, they keep it under the shoes and go. They have clever means of, even in small quantities, somebody who are frequent travelers with relatives, they send money in small quantities. Even if they are caught, it is not very serious. Like that, but over a period of time, this currency exchange or this sort of a thing, or even otherwise, Hawala people are there for a commission. They will see that the money is transported outside India. And once this money goes outside India, then it will come as NRI remittances back into India. Refining involves the exchange of small denomination bills for larger ones and can be carried out by an individual who converts a bills at number of different banks in order not to raise suspicion. Similar to that, banking system, but of course the bill system is not in force here. It's a method by which small denominations are actually aggregated to make a big amount. Then value tampering, this money launderers look for property and people who agree to sell their property on paper at prices at lower. This is the example I was quoting earlier on. 2 million example, purchase a 2 million property for 1 million while secretly passing the balance to the seller. After holding the property for a period of time, the launderer then sells it back to the true value. So they 1 crore for a payment of 20% minus indexation. So your money, laundered money, which is otherwise dangerous money, becomes white money at a pittance of a tax. Now, other methods, assets purchased with bulk cash, electronic fund transfer, and casinos. Again, one big area where a lot of money is laundered is casinos. And casinos, there are two types of casinos. Some of them are actually legitimate casinos. You know, where the betting, you have to pay the taxes for your betting, but you know, even crosswords, puzzles, lottery, all those betting will be taxed at the highest rate. But even then, you escape all your money laundering activity. Now, let us assume that you are involved in illegal trafficking or illegal smuggling of weapons. Very dangerous. If you go inside behind bars, you will never come out. Suppose the money derived out of that, you are having it cash, then tomorrow you're caught. All the more the chances are that you would get more exposed more. Not that you legitimize it, you will not get caught. It is not there, because even if you legitimize all these things, still there is a possibility that if you leave trail in the crime that you are committing, still you could be caught. But at least the money laundering again, it triggers off due to your potential financial nexus with the. If you don't have a potential source, then the suspicion triggers more. So using this method, actually, that person gets away. Now, what is the impact of money laundering? It will weaken your economy. Financial stability will come down, and absolutely it will destabilize the economy, causing financial crisis. If there's a parallel economy, why the government is so much worried about black money? Because no planning can come in proper place. All my budgets will go away. Now, today, you look at it, we are commenting on the death rates or TPR rates in many of the countries because testing is not proper. The statistics, if it is wrong, what will happen? All your planning will go wrong. Now, somebody is planning saying that TPR is only 3%, 4%, whereas my actual TPR is 12%, 15%. How do I plan? All my planning, I'll be planning with 3%, 4% in my mind. I'll be doing something I am comfortable, whereas by not testing itself, if my rate is 15%, the spread will be more. Similarly, every government has to do their financial planning to bring buoyancy to the economy. For their economy to prosper, there should be some planning, and for which statistics and figures are absolutely essential. And these figures are the indicators of what the government should do, what the government should not do, which is the money that is going to the weaker section, where all this, what is the per capita income. Per capita income, where if the money is being laundered and a lot of uneconomic activities are happening, how will I calculate the per capita income of a person? And once the money goes out of the system, how will the government have money for its development activities? So it will lead to tax evasion. And these sort of activities, if India is not a conducive place, foreign investors are very averse to coming to India. You talk to many of the people, they said, we are willing to pay taxes. There is no hanky-panky business of black and white. We are not used to such system. There are many people from different countries who have absolutely dealt with in white currency only, and they feel that it's quite uncomfortable for them to deal in something fishy. And today, if tainted money is there in the system, there's a joint venturer who is coming in, and let us imagine that the Indian partner of Indian investor has put all his black money into the system. Somehow or other, the tainted money has come into the, not black money, let's assume the tainted money has come into the system. Somehow he has successfully managed managed to convert that as his share of equity in the joint venture. And suddenly one fine morning is caught with money laundering. I don't think the foreign investor will be very happy or comfortable with that sort of news. He doesn't want to get involved himself because he'll also be subject to scrutiny. His money is not tainted money. But to get associated in a country where a lot of tainted money is there, people will think twice, thrice, 4 times. So that is a discouragement for as far as foreign investors are concerned. Interest rate volatility. If my income comes into the system and more money comes into the hands of the bank, the lending is more. I think the interest rates can be less. Interest rates can be less. But if that doesn't come into the system, then what really happens? I will be left with no other alternative. 10 in there. Then it again, I will not be able to plan properly. My interest rates will go something, it will go beyond my planning. And all, it's a premium for dishonesty. If you are encouraging this, it's a premium for dishonesty. So money laundering activity to a very large extent, that is a curse for any economy. And again, it'll aid terrorist activities. All sorts of illegal activities will flourish. Now let's quickly look at some of the meanings. 2(1)(b), meaning of money laundering, very simple, one-line meaning. Money laundering has a meaning assigned to Section 3. Normally, Section 2 is a defining section you take under the Income Tax Act. For that, most of the acts we have the direct definition coming under Section 2. But here, as I told you, the number of sections in the Act itself is very less. So 2(1)(p), again, definition comes under 2(1)(p), but it very simply says that it has a meaning assigned to Section 3. And what does Section 3 say? Section 3 says that who indulge or knowingly assist or knowingly is a party or is actually involved in any process activity connected with the proceeds of crime. Now I highlighted attempts, so it is just an attempt is enough. You need not have actually committed, but an attempt to indulge, knowingly assist or knowingly is a party to the proceeds of crime. Again, we'll have a look at the subsequent slides as to what is meant by proceeds of crime, including its concealment, possession, acquisition, or use, and projecting or claiming it as untainted property. As untainted property shall be guilty of the offense of money laundering. Now the definition, 2(1)(u) defines proceeds of crime. And what does proceeds of crime say? Any property derived or obtained directly or indirectly by any person. How? As a result of criminal activity relating to schedule offense or the property equivalent value of such property held within the country or abroad. So it is not only within the country or abroad. Abroad you have another issue, you will again be caught under the Black Money Act also. So it is not necessary that illegal benefit is to be converted into gold or some other property. The property of equivalent value, or if it is cash converted, that is also tainted. So proceeds of crime will include not only criminal activity related to scheduled property or the property equivalent also. Now what is property? Any property or asset of every description, whether corporeal or incorporeal, material or immaterial, whether it is movable or immovable, whether it is tangible or intangible, evidencing title to or interest in such property or assets, including interest in property is covered. So this is the definition of property. Of course, I just for the purpose of academic interest, we will not be dwelling too much into this. Now 2(1) schedule offense. Offenses specified under Part A of the schedule or offenses specified under Part B of the schedule, if the total value involved in such offenses is 1 crore rupees or more, and the offenses specified under Part C of the schedule. This is what Of course, each part of the schedule is separately. The schedule part A runs to pages. We will not be fully discussing that. Now, 2 and RA offences of cross-border implication. So, whatever is the offence specified under Part A, Part B, and Part C, if it is having a cross-border ramification across the border, so that it wants to cover international transaction also, maybe very simple. So, the offence is already covered under Part A, Part B, Part C. Now, if the implication is having a cross-border impact, now it will fall under 2(1) RA. Now, schedule offence list contains almost 200 offences under various laws. Under Part A. Now, we discussed about Part A and Part A, Part B, and Part C. In Part A itself, there are more than 200 offences listed under various laws. You talk of any law, even the wildlife, you could be proceeded under PMLA, even if you are booked under the Wildlife Act. Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substance Act. PMLA, very, very clean case. If you are caught by the police holding some drugs or ganja or something like that, the case could be handed over to the ED, or you could be booked under the economic offence also. This law covers that also. Now, explosive substances, all these are associated with terrorism. So the laws are framed in such a way that nobody should have an escape route. Now that takes me to another area. When you look at several offences, now what really happens is that there are too many laws and too many offences that are coming under various enactments that could possibly pave a way for booking under the PMLA. That itself is one of the curses of this PMLA, according to me. Because if you look at the history of PMLA, I don't think anybody has undergone a imprisonment. As a conviction has taken place so far, I don't think. We'll look at the statistics, but a lot of cases have been booked. It's in different stages, either in the High Court, Supreme Court, or at the trial stage. But very, very few cases. If you look at the statistics per se, with so many other various laws involved, and if it's a generalization that anything under any particular other law can be booked under PMLA, then it is not a specific law to address this. To that extent, it becomes difficult as far as this particular act is concerned. Now, Part B, I said if the offences are specified, the Part A and are 1 crore or more, and Part C having cross-border implications. These are the schedule offences. Now, person, nobody is spared. Individual, HUF, company, firm, AOP, body of individuals, whether incorporated or not. So you cannot say that there is no agreement and all. There need not be any formal agreement. If there is an AOP or BOI involved in that particular, if a group of people are involved, you could be booked under AOI or BOI. An artificial juridical person not falling under any of the above preceding clauses, an agency, office, branch owned or controlled by any of the above persons. So all these are persons covered. Of course, firm, company. Interestingly, I think LLP is not there because LLP concept was not there when the definition was there. So it will also come, it will also add shortly. That is one starking difference I saw in this. So probably now all these anti-criminal, anti-national people, all criminal fellows will now start forming LLP. Punishment for money laundering. Whoever commits the offence of money laundering shall be punishable with rigorous imprisonment of 3 years to 7 years and a fine, normal money laundering, and which involves narcotic, drugs and psychotropic act, then punishment could go up to 10 years with fine. Now, attachment, adjudication and confiscation, section 5. Now, once you ill-gotten assets cannot be transferred, that is a normal rule of any law. So, transfer, conversion, disposition or movement of property by an order issued under Chapter 3 of the Act. And how does the proceeding start? Like in 147 proceedings for issue of notice, where the director or any other officer not below the rank of, I think addition, not below the rank of Yeah, not below the rank of a deputy director. Now what he has got, he should have reasons to believe, and that has to be recorded in writing. That is what I put the highlighted portion, that is to be recorded in writing on the basis of materials in his possession, that any person is in possession of any proceeds of crime, and such proceeds of crime are likely to be concealed, transferred, or dealt with in any manner which may result in any proceedings relating to confiscation of such proceedings of crime under this chapter. Such director or officer may, by order in writing, provisionally attach such property for a period not exceeding 180 days from the date of order. So this is a simple method. First, they will attach the property, and your trial and other things will follow subsequently. Of course, those are two different legs, which I will again have explained in another chart. Now, adjudication is provided in the under section 8. Now, I 30 days has to be given to the person the notice is served, calling upon him to show cause, the source of his income, earning, or assets out of which he has acquired the property, attached, seized. You have to understand first that freezing has already taken place, as I told you. Then only the notice goes. Now the show cause is on the seized property to show the source of that, the evidence on which he relies, and other relevant information particulars, and to show cause why all or any such properties should not be declared to be properties involved in money laundering, and why those properties should not be confiscated by the central government. Now, after the opportunity is given, the adjudicating authority decides that if any property is involved in money laundering, he shall by an order in writing confirm the attachment written. So already one confirmation has been placed on hold, show cause is given, and on show cause, if he is convinced that this is ill-gotten, is out of ill-gotten, then the confirmation part will take place of the attachment or retention of the freezing of the property. And what is the period for which the attachment or retention can happen? It shall continue during investigation for a period not exceeding 365 days, or the pendency of the proceedings related to any offence under this Act before a court or under the corresponding law of any other country before competent court of criminal jurisdiction outside India, and become final after an order of confiscation is passed. That is what section 8 talks about. Now, when an order of a trial or offence under this Act, the special court finds that the offence of money laundering has been committed. Now the trial takes place, and you are given an opportunity to prove. You have to prove with reference. As I told you, it is not enough at this point of time that the income tax officer has accepted this source, because you are charged with having acquired an illegal money. Then the Act itself, the objective of the Act itself is that the illegal money is somehow or the other brought into as a legal money. So you cannot go and plead in a court of law that it is accepted by the income tax department, it is legal money, so I cannot be proceeded with under PMLA. That is not possible. So the onus will shift. First, the onus will be on him to prove that it is ill-gotten. Now, once he tries to prove and establishes, let us say that the adjudicating authority or the department tries to establish that it is ill-gotten. They have to a sort of extent succeeded but not concluded. Now the onus will pass on you to prove that whatever is shown in the Income Tax Act out of my last 7 years return, track the go back and track the transaction, trace the transaction, track the records, track the trail of the transaction, and then prove that it is not ill-gotten money. So once the onus first will be on the person who is charging you, and once he has discharged his onus, then it will be on you to defend yourself, saying that it is out of tainted, the money is tainted, not tainted out of proper legal sources. Now, what happens when on conclusion of the trial, the specified court finds that it is ill-gotten money, it shall order that such property involved in the money laundering shall stand confiscated to the central government. So that is what the confiscation is all about. And when in conclusion of the trial, if it is proved otherwise, that money laundering has not taken place, it shall be ordered to be released forthwith. So these are the two extreme conditions. In most of the cases, it's now lagging in trial. Second is hardly happening. First, it is pending. It is confiscated and pending. So what really happens is you will not be able to transfer the property. It will be freezed. Central government shall be notification, the official gazette appoint a administrative authority, chairperson and 2 members. It is the, adjudicating authority, a chairperson and 2 persons. Adjudicating authority, you should be different from, it is different from an investigating agency. ED is not the adjudicating authority. It frames a case and it will pass on to the adjudicating authority. We will see that in the chart to follow. And A shall comprise of chairperson and 2 other members. And they shall have, the legal member shall have experience in the field of law, administration, finance or accountancy. And a person shall not be qualified for appointment as a member of an AA in the field of law unless he is a district judge or he is part of an ILS, Indian Legal Service. And in the field of accountancy and administration unless he possesses such qualification as may be prescribed. Now, section 11, summons production of documents, evidence. The adjudicating authority shall, for the purpose of the Act, have the same powers as are vested in a civil court. All the powers that are in a civil court that are vested with the adjudicating authority. So, calling for summons and all the powers that a judge of a civil court enjoys, this adjudicating authority that body enjoys. That including discovery, inspection, enforcing attendance, so on and so forth. I am not receiving affidavits, etc. I am not dealing at length on that. Now, obligation of banking companies financially. This we are concerned with because as auditors, when we go to the bank, now there is a little more onus on us to, the responsibility is more on us. Now, banks and financial institutions or intermediaries accepting money are under obligation, under reporting obligation. They are called reporting entities. And these reporting entities shall maintain record of all transaction information relating to transaction and clients, information relating to beneficial owners, if any of clients, furnish information of such transaction to directors, and such information shall be kept confidential. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware that, on one hand, bank will tell you, we have experience with our clients. Transactions account route cheyyanam. Ningada limit inu pattiya transactions onnum pora. Appo venannundengil ningal paisa withdraw cheyna paisa enna thirichu bank il angu itta madi. You can deposit the same money, need not be sale proceeds. Many banks tell that because when for renewal purpose they want to show transactions through the accounts. What really happens is, if the transactions are not there, they'll say that cash withdrawal can again be again deposited and again withdrawn. So that deposits in bank, routing through bank. But the danger here is that too much of frequent routing like that, the banks are under an obligation to report to the ED. When they find something suspicious, cash transactions of higher magnitude or some suspicious transactions, or in NRA account, frequently in some NRA account, they feel that there is a taint, there is a smell of a taint. Banks have been instructed by circular by the Reserve Bank of India, by the central government to report to agencies like ED or other investigating agencies like CBI if the case is very of a grievous situation. They are to report to the investigating agency. So we need to be careful just for allowing some transactions to happen in an account. If you are getting caught in the reporting format, things could be a little dangerous for us. Now, the director has power to call for information maintained by the RE as mentioned in the earlier slide. Every information shall be kept confidential. Now, enhanced due diligence. Every reporting entity shall, prior to the commencement of the transaction, verify the identity of the. So banks have to, as you know, why? Why? Now the question, this answers why also. Aadhaar PAN is just not getting linked to the income tax or to have a trail of the transaction. The PMLA also mandates the banks to collect Aadhaar and PAN for the purpose of this act. You know, Aadhaar gives you an identity of the person, PAN gives you a connection to the income tax department. And with this, you know, with technology moving up further with the sharing of information, I think if the banks are able to give this information, suddenly the ED or the other investigating agency can watch from their place itself what is the activity that is happening in these financial institutions. Now take steps to examine the ownership and financial position, sources of funds. Take steps to examine the purpose behind the transaction. If client fails to provide the information as above, RE shall not permit the transaction to be carried out. So any transaction, that's why many times we challenge. Suppose we send the money, bank is asking you so many questions. What is their propriety to ask? After all, my money, my bank account, what right he has got to ask all these things? You know, 12AA of PMLA mandates a financial institution to ask these questions, satisfy themselves if there is a suspicious transfer. For example, let us assume that somebody is on a constant basis depositing money outside, doesn't have any business. He is applying money for purposes of drawing money or going into some proper channel, and the bank is suspecting something. Actually, bank is duty bound to actually inform the concerned authorities. Take steps to examine the ownership and financial position, sources of funds to examine. Take steps for the purpose behind the transaction. That's why for non-business purpose, suppose bank is questioning, many clients have come and asked me, sometimes bank is asking me questions, are they entitled to ask? If you're asking me, are they entitled? They are entitled. Yes, there is no doubt about it. When a transaction appears to be suspicious, RE shall increase the future monitoring of transaction undertaken by the client. Powers of Directors, Section 13. Order to make an inquiry with regard to obligations of RE, they got the power prescribed under Section 13. Direct to audit the records of RE considering the nature of complexity of the case if in his opinion that it is necessary. Suppose the reporting entity, you know, the reporting is not up to the mark, or there is suspicion for the director, he can order an inquiry into the records of the auditing inquiry, whether he's following the norms, whether things are being complied with properly. And in case of non-case of obligation by the RE, issue a warning, direct the company to direct to comply with specific direction. Periodical reporting may be asked, and in addition to that, a fine of 1,000 or 1 lakh can be imposed. So exactly, this is one of the reasons. You know, there is a part other than their regional office, zonal office, or the Reserve Bank. There is a control over banks by the director, the appropriate authority under the PMLA. So that is another obligation. If they don't follow the directions, then they could be fined also. Now, power of survey is contained under Section 16. Similarly, almost similar to any other powers under Income Tax Act, based on the material, if there is reasons to believe that a person has committed an offence under Section 3, a person has committed, he may enter any place within the jurisdiction allotted to him, in respect of which he is authorized for the purpose of this section by such authorities as in the area for which he is placed. Similar powers as are contained under any other act. Now, search and seizure, power to director or other officer for search and seizure, where he has reasons to believe, and that reason has to be recorded in writing also, that a particular person has committed any act which falls under the money laundering activity, or as in his possession any proceeds of crime involved in money laundering, or any records relating to money laundering, or any property related to the crime. So under these circumstances, for reasons to be recorded in writing, he can order a search and seizure under Section 17. Now, what are the powers? Powers to enter, search, building, break open the lock, all those are similar powers like the income tax. I'm not going to go into detail as far as this slide is concerned. That is there for you to have a look at it when you have your time at leisure. Now, appellate tribunal, this is a hierarchy under the PMLA. You know, there are 4 stages. You have the adjudicating authority, followed by the appellate tribunal. Then there is a special court and the High Court, of course, followed by the, then again, over the High Court, we have the Supreme Court also. Now, first is after the appropriate authority passes hierarchy, we go on appeal to the appellate tribunal against whose order? Against the order of a director or any person aggrieved by an order made by an adjudicating authority. You know, who will prefer an appeal? Any reporting entity aggrieved by any order. So here it is the appellant, here the person who is passing the order. And what is the time limit for filing an appeal? It is 45 days from the date on which the order of the appellate adjudicating authority is received. And the appellate tribunal may, after giving an opportunity of being heard, entertain an appeal after the expiry with the condonation of delay. It can actually do that. And then the tribunal will pass an order as it may deem fit, confirming, modifying, or setting aside the order. And the copy of the order shall also be sent to all the parties concerned. And time frame of disposing the appeal is within 6 months from the date of filing of the appeal. So that is the time frame that has been kept in there. Some high-profile cases where PMLA is invoked, collected from the media reports. Chhagan Bhujbal's case, the former Deputy Chief Minister of Maharashtra, he and his family members were proceeded under PMLA for various real estate, and various real estate developers were also involved for money laundering and associated crime. And Himachal Chief Minister CM Vidarbha Singh and family, they were also proceeded. Former, all sensational cases, some of them. Of course, our Vijay Mallya, former Kingfisher chairman, and FTL promoter Jignesh Shah in NSCL's case. All these are classic, some of the classic cases or high-profile cases. Then Gujarat cadre IAS officer Pradeep Sharma, all disproportionate assess cases. Then Zoom developers Vijay Chaudhary case, Lalit Modi's case, famous IPL Lalit Modi. Then Bank of Baroda money laundering case. And of course, there are 2 reported cases: Ramaraju Satyam scandal case, and of course, Hassan Ali Khan. These are some of the classic cases where PMLA has been invoked. This is statistics. Number of cases filed under PMLA, very far and few, as I said. This is up to mid 2015 only. They have not even updated the statistics in various high courts and Supreme Court. First is that 2008 to mid 2015, number of cases. In 2008 it was 2, going up to maximum of 23 cases in 2013. So all put together 4, 6 to 18, another 58, some 100 cases, that's all put together. The number of cases filed in appellate tribunal under the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, very few cases are pending, and no wonder it's not being disposed of also. So this is a statistics. It will give you a clear picture of the clear inability of the adjudicating authority or the officials in being able to proceed under this act. Now this is a typical flow of events. How the intelligence is collected. Now, flow of events is like this. Schedule offense is once a schedule offense is committed, there are investigating agencies, be it the police, CBI, or the Narcotics Bureau, or the Forest Department, Wildlife under the Wildlife Act. So these are the agencies that actually carry out the initial investigation. And if they find that the fraud is to a level that cannot be handled or requires much higher investigation, or they find that this is penetrating or leading into an angle of PMLA, then they will file a complaint or charge sheet them and file a complaint in the jurisdictional court, which is the special court. There's a special court for this purpose. That is one area where the directly under the offense is actually taken cognizance of by investigating agencies like police, CBI. On the other hand, the investigating agency which is interested, the enforcement directorate, collects information from their own sources as well as the high value financial transaction unit set up by the Ministry of Finance. From the FIUs, there are a lot of high value financial transactions, and the ED collects information from that, and they have typically their own sources. And from there, they have two options. Either if it is the magnitude is less, they will pass it on to the adjudicating authority with their comments and initial investigation, and the adjudicating authority will take on from there. And we saw that what will happen of that. From there, it will go to a provisional attachment, and then confirmation of the provisional attachment, so on and so forth. And alternatively, a complaint will be filed if the magnitude of this investigation is very high. They will be filing to the special court. And of course, once it is in the special court, the procedure is it is either conviction in the scheduled offense or conviction for money laundering, and then confiscation of the tainted property. So these are the two routes that usually take place with regard to the offense. Now, risk of invocation against professionals. You have to be very. This is one of the reasons why I chose this subject. Now, 3 of PMLA dealing with the Offence of Money Laundering Act provides that whosoever directly or indirectly attempts to indulge or knowingly assists. So this is very important. I am not going to the full definition. So the language of Section 3 has widest possible amplitude. So it covers whoever directly or indirectly attempts to indulge or knowingly assist. So it is quite possible that we professionals could fall under abetting. If you have knowingly supported a person, as found by the court in the case of Chhagan Bhujbal's case, there they have found that the chartered accountant was involved in that case. That is the reason why PMLA was actually initiated against the chartered accountant. So merely because source is proved, it becomes extremely important for us to understand the client. If a client is dealing in clandestine transactions, always advisable not to go near the client. Anything under the PMLA, if it is ill-gotten money, if he is known to be involved in something, let us forget that client, because our profession, our career will be at stake. Now, risk of invocation, continuing that, what happened in Vijay Sai Reddy's criminal case relating to offence under PMLA, the Supreme Court actually, after analyzing the facts of the case, it cancelled the bail of the respondent CA. And I'll just take 2 minutes to go through what the observation of the Supreme Court was in that case. Finally, though it is claimed that the respondent here, being only a chartered accountant, had rendered his professional advice in the light of the various serious allegations against him, his nexus with the main accused A1 contacts with many investors all over India, prima facie cannot be claimed that he acted only as a CA and nothing more. It is an assertion of the CBI that the respondent here is the brain behind the alleged economic offence of the huge magnitude. The said assertion in the light of the materials relied on before the special court and the High Court and placed in the course of argument before this court cannot be ignored lightly. So that is the observation of the Supreme Court, and bail was denied to the chartered accountant. You can see how dangerous this provision is if you are caught for abetment. And finally, in order to ensure that a professional is not caught in the quagmire of PMLA, it would be advisable to do a proper due diligence and KYC of the client itself, prospective client, to ensure that one does not fall within the broad scope and contours of Section 3 of PMLA. In other words, a professional should ensure that he does not deal with clients who are engaged in various criminal activities included in the scheduled PMLA. So precisely the reason why I chose this subject is that one is merely because it is explained in income tax, that doesn't mean it is not tainted money. If still the source could be traced back to ill-gotten or your taint with which you have acquired the money, then still the client could be in trouble. And if you have abetted, you could also be in trouble. That is one reason. And the second thing is, as I told you, ED, PMLA is being invoked in many cases as professionals. Whether it is our client, there are a lot of queries coming by PMLA, and as professionals, I think it is duty bound or it is obligatory on our part to know the various subsidiary acts. And that is yet another reason why you chose this subject to share my thoughts with you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a wonderful evening. I thank my host branch, LIP, for having given me yet another opportunity to share my thoughts with you. On this subject, I learned a lot. In fact, I must confess that I did not have this much of knowledge of PMLA. Of course, along with me, my team members, of course, my juniors, CA Shagund and CA Reshma, they have always been helpful to me because I only deliver what has been prepared. The hard work, actually, the donkey's work goes to them. And finally, I come here and then probably try to do a job of a presentation after going through whatever they have collected. Of course, adding a little bit here and there, and from my own research, whatever is applicable. Big thanks to both of them and the other team crew who have helped them. And once again, to my pet LP branch for having given me an opportunity, and to all the members, quite a large members by our standards on a working day evening, sparing your time to be with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. It was a wonderful presentation. Now it's
Thank you.
question and answer session. If any of you have questions, directly you can ask to Krishan sir. Please unmute yourselves and ask your question.
I think chat box there is no question, so you can directly ask me.
Yeah.
I keep telling either there is no doubt, I was very clear, or it has gone above your head. I keep telling that. Mostly it would have gone above your head only. That's why no questions are there. It's a tough fact because especially when we are not practicing on that, probably when we encounter problems, I think that's the time when we get more doubts.
Sir, it was a wonderful session by you, sir. Really,
Thank you.
yeah, really, we got a lot of information, new areas. Lot of reports are taken by the Financial Intelligence Unit through the MLA Act, no, sir?
FIU is providing a lot of information. In fact,
Even transfer.
Government is moving towards a regime where, you know, they say that all your financial transactions are going to be plotted in your tax returns in the future. So everything will be there. Only all these capital gains or your property income deductions, whatever is there, you'll have to probably claim in your return. Otherwise, all your financial transactions are stated to be it's going to be in place in your tax returns, and it is already, even now it is there in the reservoir of the department's information database. But the problem is they don't have enough manpower to execute.
Yeah. Yes.
FIUs is a great source of information for the department. All
I heard that
transactions are reported.
Yeah.
The problem is there are so many high value transactions, they are not able to segregate that and pass on to different locations.
If any client is caught by any of the transaction, all those informations will be put to him on his head.
Pardon?
Any client, any assessee has got through the PMLA Act by the FIU transactions and all the informations they gathered from various sources will be applied to him. So he will be finished.
Yes, that is quite possible. but it is also possible to see in a narcotic act and all, if somebody gets caught, I think initial stages it will be only to track the trail of that. Then later on, all his financial assets will be scrutinized. That is one problem, because even your
If it is in his name,
legitimate sources may be subject. That's the problem.
if it is his name, even other names, that will be okay.
Yeah.
Hello?
The other name, Benami will come. If it is other name, see the beauty of this Black Money Act I did mention, because black money is covered under that. Suppose if you're caught under the Black Money Act, that is one sufficient reason for proceeding under PMLA also. So even if you try to get out of the Black Money Act, unless you get yourself absolved out of the Black Money Act, if you're going to be penalized under the Black Money Act, that is a ground for proceeding under PMLA.
Yeah. Any one of this will apply.
Yes.
Or only.
Yes. Now that brings me back. All these three are actually Benami, Black Money, and this PMLA are interlinked to a certain extent.
Yes.
That you will find, because after this presentation, you will find that it is just not normally under Income Tax Act. It is for income tax, taxing your income only. Whereas if you get caught under one of the act, it could be interlinked. You could get caught in the other act also.
Yeah. That's why I told you will be finished.
You will be finished unless you prove and get out. And proving and getting out, you see the number of cases that are pending. I am not given an opportunity to prove. There may be so many innocent cases that are lying there.
Or before get caught by the department, we have to get into the politics.
Get into politics today. Getting into politics could be a reason for proceeding under PMLA. That could also happen.
So we can expect some chartered accounts also to get into the politics.
Let them enter politics, not let them come under PMLA.
എങ്ങനെയുണ്ട് ചികിത്സയൊക്കെ കഴിഞ്ഞോ സാറേ?
ചികിത്സ നാളെ കൊണ്ട് തീരും.
അപ്പൊ 6-ാം തീയതി നല്ല ഇരിപ്പായിരിക്കുമല്ലോ.
6-ാം തീയതി ലാസ്റ്റ് ഗ്രാൻഡ് ഫിനാലെ അല്ല നമ്മുടെ വെബിനാറിന്റെ.
അത് നല്ല ഇരിപ്പാണ് അല്ലേ?
അത് കുഴപ്പമില്ല. അത് നമ്മുടെ സബ്ജക്റ്റിലൂടെ തിരിച്ചു വരുമല്ലോ. നമ്മളത് കാരണം
148.
Quite interesting. That will be more interesting because new 148 is actually interesting.
Yes. Lot of cases are coming.
ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞ പോലെ it is playing the cards in front of you and then doing it. Unlike ഇതുപോലെ അല്ലാതെ behind the back അല്ലല്ലോ. അത് the reasons have to be given ahead. അതിനു മുമ്പേ നമ്മളെ തരണമല്ലോ.
അല്ല സാർ ഇപ്പൊ ഈ മറ്റേ PMLA ആക്ച്വലി പറഞ്ഞ കേസുകൾ ഉണ്ടല്ലോ, സാർ പറഞ്ഞ ലിസ്റ്റ് ചെയ്ത കേസുകൾ, സാറിന്റെ ഒരു നല്ലൊരു ഒബ്സർവേഷൻ അത്. പല കേസുകളും അവസാനം ഇല്ലാതെ പോവാ. അഡ്ജുഡിക്കേഷൻ അവിടെ സമയമാകുമ്പോ അത് പോകും, തേഞ്ഞു മാഞ്ഞു പോകും.
അല്ല തേഞ്ഞു മാഞ്ഞു പോകും. പക്ഷെ പ്രോബ്ലം ഇസ് ആ പ്രോപ്പർട്ടി വിൽക്കാൻ പറ്റത്തില്ല. വൺസ് യു കോട്ട് അണ്ടർ ദിസ് ആക്ട് you may ultimately get exonerated or acquitted. But your lifetime is gone. All your financial assets and your bank account freeze, you get stuck.
Yeah, whatever you enjoyed is enjoyed. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now it's my turn to propose vote of thanks. Respected Chairman, CA Rajneesh Sharmurthy, Faculty of the Day, CR Krishnan, my dear fellow Chartered Accountants. Indeed, it was a very fruitful day. Normally, we Chartered Accountants are getting calls from our clients regarding this money laundering, but we may give some advices, but that may not be in accordance with this act. Now we got this more insight into this act. We are very much to you, thankful to you, sir, for your time. Though you are undergoing some treatment, you took your time to spend with us, to share your knowledge. Once again, thank you very much from the Alapi branch and from the managing committee.
Thank you, Martin.
I thank all members who joined for the session. Though it was too late, you all joined for the session. We will have this final, as he said, grand finale of this series on next Friday. please do join virtually. Further details, Chairman will announce soon, and we expect your full participation on that day also. Thank you very much.